Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in a couple minutes. We'll let folks log on and get ready to go. In the meantime, sit patient with us, and we have a great discussion for today. Okay, we have a good group on now, so we'll get started. Today's webinar is a conversation on overcoming challenges at scale for EV fleet charging facility operations. Thank you all for being on today and joining us. I'm Shelby Jackson, your moderator for today and Voltera Senior Manager of Marketing. I'm a marketing professional with over a decade of experience across automotive, real estate, and EV industries. I joined Voltera 2 years ago after starting my journey in the EV space at Nikola for 2.5 years. Over that time, I've seen this industry evolve rapidly, but one thing has remained clear: there's still a lot of important work ahead for all of us to make sure EV fleet adoption is truly scalable and sustainable. Today's session is inspired by insights we've shared in Voltera's recently published playbook number 5, which focuses on EV charging facilities operations, which we all know is a critical piece of the puzzle when we're scaling electric fleets. We'll be diving into 3 core areas during this session on reliability, total cost of EV infrastructure, and what the future holds. Our goal is to go through real world insights with 2 industry leaders that I'm excited to have on here with us today. First, we'll go through a quick run of show. Right now, we're in step number 1 in the intro. Next, we'll hear from our speakers, have them introduce themselves. Then we'll dive into our panel discussion, followed by a Q&A session and some closing remarks. General housekeeping. We will accept Q&A questions throughout the webinar, so the chat will be open. Please add questions as they come up. We will have this as more of a fireside chat, so if there's a question that comes in that's very relevant to the topic, we'll pull them in during the conversation, and then we will table some other questions for the Q&A session. So if you have a question and it's relevant to what the speakers are saying, please don't feel like you need to hold back and hold it for the Q&A. Next, I will turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves. Josh, do you want to kick it off on the Voltera side?
Sure thing. Thanks, Shelby. And hi, everyone. My name is Josh Kelleher. I am Director of Technical Operations at Voltera. And I have been at Voltera for a little over 2 years now, but I've spent a lot of time in the industry and worked with a lot of folks on rolling out charging. I got my start at EA, Electrify America, working on their commissioning and operations program, kind of early days, right before any sites were launched or the hardware was even a fully baked product. And then had the opportunity to go work for a hardware manufacturer in BTC Power, working on their operations program, which was wonderful. Um, Ultimately wound up at Rivian, head of the field service team for energy and charging there, before landing here at Voltera. So seen a lot of different perspectives on the charging industry, been a lot involved in a lot of really great stuff, and had the opportunity to learn from some tremendous people. So I feel fortunate to share some of that experience, I guess, here today. One of the people I did have an awesome opportunity to work with was Camille, and so I'll turn it over to her so she can introduce herself. Though I have a feeling a lot of people already know who she is. So Camille, take it away.
Very kind of you, Josh. Good morning, everyone. I was gonna say happy Monday because that's how my week has been. Happy Wednesday or third Monday, wherever you're at. But super excited to be here. You know, my background, I actually started out in a space almost 10 years ago as EV driver support. So really spending a lot of time of chatting with that end user and really understanding like, hey, maybe they're not having the greatest experience. Maybe there is an opportunity for us to do things differently or better further upstream to ensure that there is a great experience, you know, for that last person that has to interact with the EV charging station. So started ChargerHelp about 5 years ago, really to do essentially that. You know, we did it through workforce and in a huge just like shout out to Josh as a friend of the industry that has really helped, at least on the workforce side of getting folks in front of stations, touching stations and all that jazz. And then, you know, we did a lot of this through data and how we see the world around reliability, which I know we're going to get into today, but clearly huge fans of Voltera and really excited to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you both. Excited for us to dig in. So overall topic for today, we'll be talking through overcoming all these challenges at scale. Our first topic we'll be going into is the challenge of charger reliability and standardization. One of the biggest concerns we hear from fleets is, will my chargers actually work when I need them to? So let's, dig into that issue in reliability and standardization, which we know, continues to be a concern and hurdle in our industry. We'll kick off the conversation with you, Camille. You've been working in the industry for a long time, leading work in charger uptime. What's the biggest barrier today that you see when it comes to achieving consistent charger reliability?
Oh, thank you so much for this question, Shelby. And the way that I always like for people to ground everyone, is that charging stations are computers and electric vehicles are batteries with computers. And there's a way more software that occurs in the EV charging space than a gas station. Because oftentimes what folks are looking at, they're like, well, gas stations aren't this complex. Why is charging this complex, right? So I always like to start folks there. And I know we'll talk a bit about the different standards later. But one of the things that I've found, why we continue to see issues within reliability will really sit between, I think it's a prioritization around collaboration, right? I think that in order to achieve reliability, especially if you're not vertically integrated, you have to have partners at the table that is open to working with you when something doesn't work. Because there is so much software that's being exchanged. And when there is a hiccup that happens, it's very easy to say, like, oh, that's not my fault. Oh, that's not my fault. But if you have a company or companies that are prioritizing reliability, prioritizing the end user, you can figure out ways to come together in order to really deduce down what is the true issue. The other piece to this, which I think really talks into Voltera's solution, right, is having this ideal of, someone said the other day, you don't say one throat to choke, you have one handshake to shake. So having, folks like the Volteras and ChargerHelps of the world, like for that end user, it doesn't matter to them what the experience is. Voltera will take ownership and ensure that that asset is working regardless and making sure that those conversations are happening. And then the same thing on the ChargerHelp side. But I think it all really goes down to this ideal of, because it's a new technology, but most importantly, because it's multiple softwares that have to interact, and it could be a lot of people's fault and a little bit of everyone's fault, having organizations that will prioritize problem solving without finger pointing is of the utmost importance.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And it's been interesting to watch the development of this, right, over the past decade or so. And one thing that so my starting point for this with everybody, similar to I think we all have our own rooted perspective, right? Like the primary entry point, but mine has always been focusing on OCPP, right? And um, and really what it is, and then what goes into like what it doesn't do, right? Like what it does and what it doesn't do. And one of the things that I like to think about is, okay, putting OCPP aside for 1 second, there's the handshake between the vehicle and the charger and the communication that happens, right, between vehicle and charger whenever a charging session is initiated and throughout a session. And so that standard exists, right? Like that is an ISO standard that has been around and agreed upon. Um, but the way I like to start talking about that is, it's sort of like English. Everybody agrees, okay, we're in this conversation, we're going to speak English, right? But the problem is there's a lot of different dialects in English, right? And so, what happens is the standard's English, but then you got, Chevy speaks English like somebody from the Bronx, and BMW speaks English like somebody from the Bayou, and Rivian speaks English like somebody from like Minnesota or whatever. And so there's all these different like vernacular and like sort of like dialects and slang getting thrown around. It's all English, but it's different, right? Little differences. And the charger has to be able to code switch and speak like a native Minnesotan or Texan or Louisiana, Bayou, whatever, right? And so the point is there is a standard, yes, for how these things are meant to communicate and what they're supposed to say and how quickly they're supposed to reply to some sort of request for information. But there is a little bit of interpretation that still happens, and so that's why like the interoperability test is still a thing, right? If it were all ironclad, it would just be validation testing, right? It wouldn't be interoperability testing. You wouldn't have to do these two things talk together. And then sitting on top of that is this OCPP layer, right? That's how most of us as network operators or anybody providing remote support for charging infrastructure, that's how they engage with the chargers for the most part. Or I should say, that is the universal standard for chargers outside of the vertically integrated solutions like Tesla or others, right, that have come up with their own. And OCPP is it's taking what is occurring at the charger and packaging it up into a message and sending it, right? So it's sort of like this like read, paraphrase, and send, and then receive, paraphrase, and relay to the charger itself, right? So there's these different layers of communication, which is like, we'll get into that some more maybe, but there's also just this like not fully agreed upon or consistent implementation of those standards around the communication, right? And so you've seen this a lot, right? Like what is ChargerHelp doing to kind of address that? Like what's the niche that you fill there? Because I think it's really interesting.
No, thank you for that. Before I talk a little bit about the niche, I want to also point out the fact that like on most like RFPs that are coming out, and even on most RFPs that come out with requirements for OCPP, it is this ideal of being capable of OCPP, not necessarily and like OCPP 2.0 capable, right? But not required, which I think is a very interesting in that word choice. And then the other piece to it, not a ton of folks are actually like Open Charge Alliance certified, right? I know there are folks that are starting to do it now, but like that isn't they haven't gone through that true like certification like test through the Open Charge Alliance. So I think all of that validates what you just said. And so for ChargerHelp, look, this is what we're kind of doing. I like your the language or the vernacular differences, because essentially what I'm doing is like running around trying to hear how everyone speaks and figure out help the system either create standardization, to say, or at least a way to easily interpret, right? And so we believe that is done really in the field, right? And I think this is where Josh, we align a lot, is that as field service technicians, at least when ChargerHelp is sent out, oftentimes it's because the software provider and the manufacturer don't know what to do. And it's a little bit different than like typical O&M folks where they're just going out to, turn a wrench or whatever. Like, no, like I'm interested in like the really hard, complex software problems because we want to get as much insight and data from the field as well as what are the behaviors of these different software protocols that are happening, and we put that back into our cloud, and essentially helps us to understand what needs to happen. And then, best case scenario, right? We create an interpreter for the dialects. But we believe that it's through field service interactions, and when everybody behind their computers can't figure it out, but you have a technician in the field working with that person behind the computer, what more can you learn? What more can you understand? And then how do you continue to build on that data set?
Interesting. So what you're saying is, so the context here is like OCPP is how we remotely monitor stuff, right? And that's the most pervasive standard. There's emergent, like some of these charger manufacturers are providing additional portals for telemetry separate from OCPP.
Más o menos.
Yeah, yeah. But there's this OCPP. That's how we engage with it remotely. It's how we learn about issues or what's happening with the charger, right? It throws faults or error codes, and we get those messages. There's the communication that's happening sort of locally between vehicle and charger. And you're saying like the third level of input or the third input here is like eyes in the field. So there's something happening. We either hear about it from a driver or we hear about it from OCPP, and then somebody in the field is helping us understand what is actually happening. That's your common sort of experience, right?
Yeah, and look, because our goal is that, because usually when we're going out to troubleshoot, we gotta schedule time with the knock, which is wild to me because then you can only talk to the knock at 2. But then, like, what if you can't get access to the station at 3? And so we're saying it's, in a scalable way, like we have to get to a part where you can't always sit on the phone with the knock. What information can you learn from? And the last thing I'll say to this, because one of the things that was always interesting to me for a lot of software providers, when technicians were calling into the NOC, and the NOC is a network operations center engineer, when they were helping a technician, oh, try this, try that, no one was writing that down. And so you have technician go back out again, and you have them trying the same thing that the last 4 times, it absolutely did not work, but no one wrote it down, right? And so that's what I've been trying to force the industry is like, to not think of field service as just kind of like this labor thing, but to understand really the richness of the data that exists in the field. And most importantly, what is the scalable way for those learnings? Because we will not always be in a place that we can call a knock all day long and sit on hold and wait for the knock to help us out. And like, that's not scalable. That's not going to work. At least I don't.
Like it's expensive, right? Like if it's really expensive, because then you need like a lot of stuff. Like you need a lot of hands to address any one issue, right? And so like for everybody like listening in here, Camille and I look at this through the lens of like, okay, there are problems. There are inherently problems that need to be solved. Stuff happens, right? And as you said, Camille, these are like very complex pieces of technology. There's low voltage and software firmware. There's the hardware and mechanical side of it and the electrical side of it that a lot of people, akin to the fuel pump, right? And that's sort of where it stops. But there's a lot of stuff that has to go right for this to work. I mean, there's a lot of power moving through it, right? And so getting into like, how we think about costs and reliability and operating this equipment, having somebody in the field doing, okay, so like, man, this just gets this gets me going here. So we have remote monitoring, right? That is how we identify issues, and that either happens again through OCPP, some other telemetry, or somebody calling in and says, charger no working. And so that's how we learn about problems. And then there is the remote diagnostics and troubleshooting piece. Okay, before we send somebody out, let's see what's happening. We got some error codes. We got some somebody said they saw lights turning different colors and, it beeped at me 3 times. I don't know what that means and blah, 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 blah. Okay, cool. We got all this. And it points to one of 3, 4, 5 things that could be wrong here, from very simple to, pulling out a bunch of parts, right? Like it could runs a spectrum. And then, there's not a lot of confidence in which one of those five things always is and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's
Yeah.
not uncommon, right? But it's not always obvious which one of those five things is going to fix it. And so, some of that might be remote. Some of it might be send somebody to the site, get some additional info, or send somebody to the site and have them start at solution number one and keep working 2, 3, 4 until the problem gets fixed, right? And not to mention the logistics of scheduling the time between the field tech and the remote support team, and maybe like an engineer for the equipment as well who help manufacture or design it, and the logistics of getting all the parts there, right? It's a lot to just sort of like try and solve one discrete problem, and there are dozens of problems at a large charging depot a week, right? There's stuff that comes up. So with that whole stage set from issue identification, remote diagnostics, troubleshooting, and on-site intervention, and all of the steps and coordination involved across all three of those pillars just to resolve one problem that occurs dozens of times a week, right? Like, I think it's really, really interesting that this is where the industry is at. A little disappointing, if I'm being perfectly honest. Like, how are we still here? Because I look at like adjacent industries and I'm like, okay, cool. They've done all this stuff to where like an error code is an error code, right? And it means what it means, and this is what you go do to fix it. Maybe I'm like being a little idyllic here, but that's not too far off, right? And so I struggle with that, right? Like what do we do to streamline this, and as Shelby kind of transitioned here, like ultimately reduce the cost of operating these sites, right? So curious what your thoughts are there. That was a bit of a ramble, a bit of a vent, but I'm wondering what you think. Like, how do we get better? Like you mentioned data. What do we do with that data? What are we collecting? How do we use it? And then how does it reduce operating costs in your mind?
No, absolutely. Look, this is one I think is having a system that tracks that entire process that you just laid out. Because usually because I used to work for EV Connect, and I was, I was head of our site host. So I ran a lot of the support. And so I'm operating in my platform. I'm operating in Zendesk. I'm operating in Excel sheet. I'm operating in emails. And so even being able to track how long that takes and how it varies by manufacturer and software provider was very important to me. Right. And so at ChargerHelp, we built out a single pane of glass so I can bring in just that whole process. And then the part that starts getting really interesting, we get very, very, tight on being able, I can tell you software, hardware, makeup, parts of the state on what part of that other process that's probably going to more than likely take twice as long than you think to impact the over mean time to repair. We've gotten like that level of like really good. But in regards to the data part, right, what I then say is that we have this happen. Like, so at ChargerHelp, we have a fixed cost, and this will help us probably move us to the next thing, right? So when I came in against my investors, their suggestions, I was like, look, for a level 2, give me $300 for the whole year. I'll roll a truck forever until I fix it. Right. And so I'm not charging you every hour, every this. And my investor's like, you are crazy. And I was like, no, because what I do understand is that there is a way to get better and faster at solving issues. And we waste a lot of time in our industry around just that whole process. Like, oh, the part got there and no one's there, or the person lost the part. Like, there's just so much like just business standards that we don't have yet, but we're getting there, that impacts overall mean time to repair. So what do? We collect all the information. We make assumptions about hardware, software partners. We make assumptions about customers. And then that helps us to understand the level of risk that we're exposed to of how many times I'll have to roll a truck. But I'll tell you that most times, most issues that we see across multiple customers. And so for one instance where I might have to roll a truck 5 times, that next time I might not have to roll a truck at all. Right? Because we've been able to go back to our software partner or manufacturer and say, like, actually, you keep thinking that it's these 4 parts, and it's not, honey. It's because the SIM card was never activated. It's stuff like that. And that's actually a real example that just happened yesterday. We just came out to like, no one activated the SIM card. That's why the station is not working, not because of these 4 parts, right?
Like a communication module or an antenna or like, some sort of harness in between or whatever.
Yes. And so, but we have the proof, right? So now in the platform, it's like, I can show you the last we've touched over 40,000 charging stations at this point. I can show you the last 300 work orders with these specific ingredients to prove to you that it's not that and it's more than likely this. And so that's how we think about it. But I do want to, Shelby, I don't want to take up, I do want to move us through it. But yeah, I just wanted to add that. I'm sorry if it was a little long-winded.
No, you guys, transitioned into the next topic organically, which is great. Now, one thing I've seen being talked about in the industry at different events is, fleets are so used to TCO and that model being truck, gas, vehicle maintenance. With charging, there's starting to be a conversation about, what are total cost of operations, TC ops language, because there's all of these hidden costs that, are not something that fleets typically think about when dealing with traditional ICE vehicles, that we're learning about in charging. So, I feel like you guys have hit the nail on the head covering the topic. Anything else?
I guess the only thing I would, add, like Voltera and ChargerHelp, we have a good relationship. I think because of the way that we think about the world, and having one person that's like responsible is very important because it helps control that cost. And then also with you being responsible for the reliability, like you're really thinking about that cost a lot and you're not pushing that onto the customer. Whereas usually when ChargerHelp comes in, it's because the customer has had multiple different software people, multiple hardware people. They're very confused. They've been sending out just field service technicians, that are just going on site to troubleshoot issues. And it gets very like painful, but when we think about the right way to do it, like having an organization like a Volterra that you're like, hey, this is this one organization that is responsible for all of it, it reduces the pain, right? Because even for ChargerHelp, we need the whole industry to get better. Like people think like, oh, I like broken stations. No, it's very expensive, huh? Like we need everybody to have, to rise together. So like having solutions, I think like both of ours where we serve kind of different customers, but I think the ideal is still that someone's bottom line, someone's business model is in alignment with the customer's reliability. Where if you don't have someone responsible for that, you as somebody that's deploying infrastructure will be the one having multiple truck rolls with no one that's responsible and having to pay that cost, right? Because parts warranty only lasts for so long. And a lot of these issues, which I know that you can probably attest for, Josh, you can't directly say like, oh, it's this part or it's that part. It's usually a bit convoluted. And then so your warranty doesn't come into play, right? And then you're coming out of pocket for all of these extra costs. So I do want to point that out.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to like the sort of the way this all gets managed collectively, right? Because the reliability is informed. There's kind of two ways to approach reliability, and I think that we're trying to kind of meet in the middle here. But there's the inherent reliability of the hardware itself, right? Like how well is this thing engineered? How well is it built? How does it work? And what are the kind of like what's the serviceability of that thing, right? So how easy is it to replace parts? How easy is it to fix something remotely, right? Or correct an issue remotely, that kind of deal. The other end is like operationally, okay, how efficient are we at tackling those issues that we come in? That goes to the, how are we able to learn about the issue in the first place? How are we able to remotely diagnose and troubleshoot? Can we increase our remote resolution rate? As you said, going back to the manufacturer, we found that this is a thing that maybe could be addressed with some sort of improved virtual intervention software, remote technology type deal. Volterra, one way that we do that is we actually hardwire all of our chargers to Ethernet, and we are able to remotely tunnel in. We are able, a lot of chargers have like a configuration menu that you can access through a static IP address. So we create addressing across all of our sites so that we can remotely tunnel into any of our chargers and make changes from anywhere, right? Like, so
double click on that, Josh, just really quickly.
Yeah.
Like everyone, like folks ask me, how do you get the most reliable stations? I say hardwire stations. And if people say, oh, it's too expensive, they want to use Wi-Fi, they want to use telecom. I said, you will absolutely spend whatever money you think you're saving in truck rolls around comms issues. Just hard wire the station. So that is so smart. But yeah.
Yeah. And that's not even to maintain a reliable connection. It affords us the opportunity to do
Please.
something remotely that otherwise we would have to send somebody
Right.
to the site to do locally, right? Um, so, there are pieces like that. And then there is, going back to trying to improve efficiency of like the operational interventions. It's like, okay, how can we consolidate this patchwork of different entities that have to be involved in addressing a problem? And then how do we, get really good at managing the bandwidth of all of those resources that
Right.
contribute to operating these sites, right? And so what I think about is if I'm a big fleet operator, like pretend I'm operating, I have Josh's Trucking LLC or Josh's taxi service, and they're all autonomous, and I've got 30 charging hubs around the country, and one is ChargePoint, and one's BTC Power, and one's ABB, and one's Zarova, and I'm just tossing manufacturers out there. Each one of those manufacturers approach operating their equipment
Yeah.
a
Right.
little bit differently. Some have their preferred service vendors, others have training programs or certification programs for field service personnel. Some have really robust operating manuals and resources available for NOC engineers to be able to like understand how things work and how to arrive at a potential root cause, taking those 5 potential root causes down to 1 or 2, so that I can like get really good at sending the right person with the right skill set and the right parts to the site to fix a problem. Others, though, struggle with it, right? And that's because this industry has seen a lot of rapid innovation, and it's hard, honestly, to be diligent about those things when you're constantly trying to improve on the hardware or meet the demands of a new, market niche
Right.
inside of the industry. So consolidating that patchwork under a single entity like Voltera, or aggregating it under a group like ChargerHelp to serve as like, hey, customer, you don't have to keep up with the process for engaging. This is how we fix this equipment. This is how we fix this manufacturer. This is what we do in this manufacturer. Like, I think it's needed in the industry. Like this consolidation has to happen on this operational intervention piece so that one group like ChargerHelp or like Voltera can go to the manufacturers and start to negotiate sort of representative of a larger population. Say, hey, I have all these customers that I provide support to, and I, ChargerHelp or Voltera, insert CPO here, basically, represent your hardware. I am responsible for making sure that your customers are happy with your hardware. So it's in your best interest and our best interest to work really closely together and figure out how we want to do this so that at the end of the day, the question of reliability goes away. That's the goal. So I see that as a common trend, and it's supported by things like pulling in that data every step of the process and creating that feedback loop into the manufacturer side.
Yes, yeah. Or even for the customers, like I could tell you this manufacturer, it takes them 3 times more, right, to ship the right part than this manufacturer, right? We've even got things down to breakage rates per manufacturer just by tracking the whole process of like, okay, you need to hit 97% uptime and you only got 11 days of downtime for the year. You probably more than likely won't hit it with this software hardware manufacturer. You probably more likely will hit it here. If you purchase this additional whatever, you probably will hit it. So yeah, that's what we've just been trying to get everything down to numbers, because you can track these things and get these things down to numbers. And I think it helps the industry mature. And these are the things that we take back to those CEOs, and just be like, hey, this is where you stand. You should prioritize this, because I think we're in a space right now in the industry where companies, the consumer is looking for something reliable now, right? It's not just about getting something in the ground. They have an expectation that it'll work, which is not a unreasonable expectation.
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it is at all. But yeah, I mean, controlling those costs. I mean, but you touched on a couple things though, right? Like there's some upfront costs involved with those like extra support packages, or one thing that we do is we forward stock parts, right? So all of our sites that we build, we build bigger sites, right? Like, 15, 20, 50, 60 chargers at a single location, right? So it's an easier justification for us, I think, to have a storage area with critical components available. But for the for DC fast chargers in the back of a parking lot sort of deal, like that's hard to stock parts there. And then like, parts turnover, right? Like maybe the current rev of a board gets updated. And so the rev B that I bought has a known defect. And so what happens to that part? Is it scrapped? Is it returned to manufacturer and replaced with an updated version? There's a lot that goes into that. But all this involves some upfront cost. And so it's like, it's still trying to solve for the problem, but I think it's like long run reducing cost, but it's still like, how do we move away from this like upfront cost and minimizing that? Like we've identified opportunities to improve. We can incorporate these sort of procedural elements, operational considerations, right, or plans. But how do we continue to drive down the costs of operating the equipment? Or do you think it's at a reasonable place too? I would ask, like, if all that gets ironed out, are we good? What do you think?
I think that a lot of this actually comes down to consumer education and in what is in the RFPs, right? Because what you'll do is here's the thing today, it's odd that we compete on reliability. And then it's odd that folks that have good solutions to reliability, we get outpriced, because our price is a little bit more expensive up front, because other folks didn't have to talk about their reliability. So I think that it's like consumer education to start doing more requirements in the actual request for proposals about how folks are actually presenting or how people, essentially requiring folks to present their plan around reliability, because then we're all competing on the same level. I think that will help innovation. I think that will help cost. I think the issue now is that there isn't really a standard of what folks are asking for. We hear a lot of folks just assume. I talk to cities and municipalities often. There's like, what, the stations break? Like, isn't the software provider just going to take care of that? Or isn't the parts warranty enough? And so there is like this lack of understanding. So they don't require it. And so I think that makes the pricing a little bit, more expensive or less expensive, where we got to figure out if it's required. I think you get into competitive pricing, and I think we could drive it down. I think that access to data and information is one thing. The other thing I've really been pushing for CEOs in the industry is to come together and put forth, specifically on the hardware manufacturer side, is for a set of standard business practices. It does not make any sense that it is drastically different to even do a get diagnostics pool on multiple different manufacturers. That should not be the case. Like, we should have evolved past that by now. But I do think that it's going to take the CEOs of these different companies to say, hey, we agree to not compete on reliability. And this is just how we allow for people to get access to just even to get diagnostic logs. Like, that's it. Not even all your data, not even your secret sauce, just like, help me to help you fix this problem. So yes, I would say consumer education, getting really savvy on that RFP. And I think the other part is like, at least on the hardware manufacturer side, what are standards or just business practice standards that we will all agree to do? So that way it's not different from every manufacturer. And then of course, I believe in getting some level of standardization around software providers as well and access to data, but that feels a little harder to accomplish than the other two, but yeah.
maybe I don't know. I think that there's like this sort of we keep on I have it up on the side here, Shelby, so like it's hard to not just keep rolling into that. You've teed it up really well.
We're out of time.
Yeah, but as we
go.
talk about kind of the future of this and what it looks like, one thing that's not on here, we've talked about like these kind of data driven insights, and what we haven't talked about as much, or maybe like opportunities for automation or additional telemetry? Like, how are we thinking about that? And specifically like how what we're doing today maybe tease up a future state that doesn't involve like a full on like rip and replace of like I got to pull out this stuff and like put in this new thing because my fleet the composition of my fleet has changed, or like there's this new reliable product available or improvement or like seismic shift in the industry technology, right? Like I know that that's something that people think about as well, but through the lens of reliability, right? Like I I almost feel, and this is just Josh thinking about this, having looked at this, like, one thing that is missing is sort of this rigor around, as you say, like consistent operational procedures, right? And to me, that looks something like I hate to advocate for like more stuff, right? Like it's not really something that I'd like to think about. But to me, that almost looks like a EV serviceability stamp, right? Like it's like cool, like certified serviceable, right? Maybe that's how we start tackling the operational end of it, where there's like, okay, I think back to before getting into EV charging, I was in the like U.S. Green Building Council lead certification industry, right? And in that, there's a lot of requirements around documenting how the building, you're building a new office space. You want to make sure it's certified LEED.
Right.
And in some places, like where I was working in DC, the LEED standard is the like DC building code standard, effectively.
Right.
Like they say you have to be minimum LEED silver certified or whatever. And I'm like, okay, cool. What does that actually mean though? Like other than getting the little sticker on the front of the building, like what goes
Right.
into that and why? And one thing that they focus on is like showing and demonstrating that your building is built as intended and designed. And then there is documentation and plan in place for the building to be maintained so that it can continue to operate at some level of efficiency. So the goal isn't just to like hit done and like get the sticker on the front window and be good to go. The goal
Right.
is to build something that you can hand off and it sustains itself, right? Like it's able to sort of continue. And I wonder if like maybe that's a missing element, right? And maybe that's one way to start thinking about creating that uh, uh, cooperation between all the
Yeah.
different entities involved. Because I don't know, I'm not sure what else does it, right? Like if the customer wants to pay less, right, the end user is looking at total cost of ops, but also total cost of ownership. You know, how do we do this in a way that everybody is sort of benefiting?
No, absolutely. I mean, my call to like what I've been focused on this year is at least getting, like I said, the CEOs of these different, like the software providers as well as the hardware manufacturers, at least in the same room. Cause like what I don't, and some of these folks, like, a lot of these guys as well, Josh, and like, I don't know how much they understand that like we need more standardization around some of these things. I don't know if they know, right? And so in my mind, I'm like, well, if we got the CEOs in the room, we presented data, we presented kind of like what we wanted to do. Like, we don't really have like, we have industry associations, but usually they're for like lobbying, but we don't just have like a industry association that's for best practice and improvement of the industry. And so what I've been asking is like, could we do something like that, to at least get folks aware, and then we could come together and agree on what is the best way to move forward. I've just never been a part of anything like that. And the more I talk to, different CEOs, they're like, no, we really haven't done anything like that. And I think this year is the year, to do that. But I know we have to move on to questions and answers, right, Shelby? Look, I'm watching the
Yes.
stop
Yeah,
Yeah.
now. Here we go.
Well, I would love that, Camille, and I think too, as we look at who's involved, and I mean, obviously, this conversation is like we've been talking about problems in the charging industry at large. They're not unique to fleet. They are present everywhere, and reliability has become a little bit of a differentiator for some of these hardware manufacturers, right? They're able to, their competitive advantage is, a more reliable end product in some cases. And so, but there's so much opportunity here. Like, one of the things that is holding back, in my opinion, this isn't the only thing, but one of the things that is holding this industry back from really like becoming competitive against any of the alternatives that exist out there, is the perception and the very real costs of reliability, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, it's in everybody's interest. I think I would, like, call me up if you're starting that, like, bringing everybody to the table. Like, I would love to be a part of that. And then, yeah, I think you're spot on there. Like, it's not just like what are you doing differently, ChargerHelp or Voltera? It should be like, what's the industry doing collectively to tackle this? Because we're holding ourselves back, I think, at this point. So yeah, fair, very cool.
Definitely. Well, great points. We have some questions that we can dive into. Just want to call out the Q&A box is still open. So as we go through this, if any other questions come up, please add them in. So our first question, and we've covered so much and touched on a lot of this already, but what are the key elements to consider when building cost-effective, scalable charging infrastructure?
I can do kind of like the O&M side, then turn over to Josh for a grander picture. Look, don't do ad hoc labor, because it's such an uncontrollable cost that you think that you're going to be saving money, but you won't, right?
What do you mean? What do you mean by ad hoc labor, Camille?
So I'm specifically meaning that you have an hourly rate and there is no cap to it. And every single time there's something wrong, you have to pay someone a 4-hour minimum to come on site to troubleshoot, to figure it out, but then or cycle the breakers, a very expensive breaker cycle. So like, don't do that. Find partners that can give, that it's either the reliability is already a part of their offering, or find someone that is going to put some skin in the game. And there's more people doing this than just ChargerHelp, and they're going to give you a fixed cost with unlimited labor, right? Because that means that they too have to figure it out, and they're not incentivized to not solve a problem, because if you call them again, they're going to get paid again. So making sure that your O&M partners are incentivized and have the same reliability mindset in mind, right? And then the next part that I would say is really getting, if you're a facilities person, and I believe Voltera does this, but making sure that your facilities management team at least has done a core training about charging stations, right? Because there's a lot of things that can be done on site from the facilities management team that you won't have to send someone on site for. And we do see that sometimes the issues do come back to user error, especially if you're working in bus depots. If you're not properly connecting the connector into the bus, the bus probably won't charge, right? But even getting that level of like granularity about how to use charging and education of the folks that are going to be at your facilities is hugely important. And then the last piece that I would say, it's just hardwire y'all stations, y'all. Hardwire your stations and require service level agreements that are not just time on site, but time to actually resolving an issue. And if you're working with a provider that has multiple software folks and multiple manufacturers, make sure you know that they too have a service level agreement of responding to emails and helping to troubleshoot. These things are so, so, so important. But I'll turn it over to you, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. I think representing, like, from the customer perspective here, right? All the things you said are incredibly important. From the operator's perspective too, what we think about is trying to position the different options that are available to a customer, right? Because we build these sites usually on behalf of an intended customer use, right? So, customer A comes in and they're like, I want, 25 chargers for this type of fleet in this location. And we say, okay, yeah, it's going to cost you between X and Y. Are you interested? And they'll say, yeah, that sounds reasonable. And then it gets into, okay, cool. Well, like, this is how you make this worth your while, right? Like, so some ideas related to operational pieces. I mean, the hardwiring, of course, is like just tremendous. It is a no-brainer, especially for an installation of that size, right? It's not a trivial cost. It is something that adds to the bottom line for sure. But like, when we are paying for a project up front and we're passing along just like, hey, now you pay a monthly or annual sort of access lease fee, right? That line item becomes so minimal. It's like it's moot, right? Like the biggest contributor to that is going to be like your land and just general construction costs. And so, I think about that as like a slam dunk. The other things that I do also think about quite a bit are, how easy have you made it to access the equipment for maintenance, right? Like, have you put a distribution panel behind lock and key in an enclosure that, in a room in a parking garage where you have to track down somebody with a key to come and open it for a technician, right? You remember that level 2 project that we were doing together, like, and how much time it just like we would have we'd show up and nobody would be there with a key and we'd have to go back the next day. Like, it was ridiculous. So anyway, yeah, I think like accessibility to equipment is a big factor in this. And then for the infrastructure at large, like just being mindful of what's coming next, right? Like, can you add power modules? Like, can you start, I don't need this much power today, so I can reduce my cost today and then add incremental, like either power cabinets that I can wire together or add power modules to equipment over time. Am I upsizing conduit and those construction elements to allow for flexibility down the road, those types of things. But there's nothing there that's super, super new. And the last piece I would just say is I love your idea of consistent SOP. Like, I think process is how you value engineer this. So
1000%.
Okay, let's go to one more question before we wrap up. This is a bit around operations, downtime for trucking. So what kinds of strides can be made to reduce downtime, especially given how hyper efficient the trucking industry is?
can I ask a just clarifying question, Shelby?
Yes.
Downtime, do you mean like dead time, like trucks just sort of sitting on the chargers, or downtime like chargers aren't working?
Let's take it charger downtime.
Got it.
Question was not very clear, but given the topic, we can control the chargers. We can't control, how fleets are operating the trucks quite as much. But we can make recommendations.
Sure. Camille, you want to start?
I mean, I think you have to start with just a trusted. I think you have to start with a trusted like third-party provider. I think that folks that go and buy directly from the manufacturer, directly from the software provider, they're all going to tell you that everything's great. But I think either, consulting, a partner that understands reliability. And like I said, there's a lot of folks out there besides just ChargerHelp or working with the Voltera, but just someone that can actually give you just insights on where people are at. That is going to be helpful. I find more and more we have our customers that we work with, they went directly to the manufacturer and and I could have told them that's probably not what you want to do right now. Not saying that they're not going to improve, but like that's probably not where for your level of reliability, that's probably not what you want right now. Right. And I think the other thing too, I will call out, usually what I find with fleet operators is that specifically in like medium heavy duty fleets, is that they think that they can solve reliability with a service level agreement for getting a technician on site. And we have to consistently like, hey, yeah, I can get someone here in 30 minutes, but will they be impactful? Will the hardware manufacturer pick up the phone to help troubleshoot or diagnose this issue? So I think also understanding that solving reliability is not technically always about getting a technician to a site, and that you should work with a third-party partner to actually give you a more truthful understanding of what is the best solution for your requirement of uptime.
Yeah, I guess for me, one of the things that I see is, and I'll go back to something you said earlier, right? Like, is like, you need somebody to pull in all these different entities, right? Like, I don't think it should be necessarily on the hardware provider to be like, okay, I have a field service person in your area, or I don't today, and I'm going to go figure out who that is for you. Like, that's not their business usually, right? Some of them do that because it's sort of they've had to, right? Very few of them do it and like make it a product that they then sell, because it's inefficient in my view. Having done it, right? Like, it can be very inefficient because now, based on how many chargers I sell as a manufacturer and where they ultimately get installed, which I have very little control over, I am now responsible for ensuring that I have a field service presence, right? That's tough. But if customer buying chargers goes to manufacturer and says, I want to do this, I want really high uptime, here's where I want to put it. And manufacturer says, I have this list of great partners I work with. And on that list are people, I recommend that you talk to about how to operate these and deliver on that reliability, because it is a team effort, right? If this becomes a little bit more cooperative, I think, between all the entities involved, Camille, instead of you hiring 20 techs to support your contracts and then Voltera hiring 20 techs to support our contracts, maybe it's a total of 25, and we're just optimizing the use of those resources, and we're cutting those cost savings extend to customers ultimately, right? And we can get more efficient with how we allocate our resources, right? And we don't have technicians just sitting around not getting, and I'm not saying they're lazy, I'm just saying that there's not enough work because we've hired them to provide support for this one site with 4 chargers in the middle of Nebraska or somewhere, right? Like, and so they have to get on a plane. I've seen this where, like, technicians are having to get on planes and fly around all over the country. I've done this, right? Like, and it's exhausting, and you can't have any sort of life like that. And so, I think if we could view this as an opportunity to sort of collectively solve problems with all of the entities sort of understanding their role and how they contribute into this, and then somebody helping to quarterback all of that. ChargerHelp, there's a lot of companies who are out there who can sort of, as you say, represent the operational interest or reality. Like, I think that those inroads need to be built a little bit more strong, like more robustly between the different groups, so that we can present a unified sort of holistic solution to these fleet operators, and then they don't have to worry about charging. Then they can just focus on getting their trucks where they need to be.
Yep. So. Yeah, then they can worry about optimizing their routes and deadheading and the fleet operation component. Yeah. Which is, I think, at Voltera, our end goal. We don't want the fleets to be worried about the day-to-day ops, of charging, because that's asking them to now learn about an entirely new industry.
Yeah, shouldn't have to, right? Like, if you go by, if I'm if I'm operating a bunch of office buildings and there's AC like units on the roof or whatever, you got rooftop units or cooling towers or whatever, I shouldn't have to hire a team to be an expert on cooling towers, right?
Yep.
Right. I should be able to call and just say, hey, AC is not working. It's not getting cold enough, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody goes and fixes that. Like, I should not have to, if I am, I don't know, if I'm a law firm, do I move into an office and hire somebody who's an expert on HVAC to ensure that my AC keeps? No. There are other companies who do that, right? So, I think it's really interesting. Like, that's an interesting parallel to me, but I could talk about this for hours. So anyway.
Yeah. That being said, we are coming up on time.
We are.
Yeah, so I want to thank you both, for joining us today, for sharing your insights. Today we covered, the real world challenges we're seeing with reliability, how to help reduce operational costs, and then, preparing for the future. We will have a blog coming out from Voltera that'll deep dive into all of these insights we talked about today. Recordings will be available, so everyone will have access to slides. Really quickly before we go, Voltera does have available capacity for fleets looking for readily available charging in the LA Long Beach area, specifically tailored to delivery and distribution. So if your fleet's ready to electrify and we have maybe scared you from trying to, stand up charging yourself, we have some solutions ready to go. And very quickly, our playbook number 5 is available. That was the catalyst for today's conversation, which rounds out our full electrification at scale series. This will walk you through everything from site acquisition through to full facility operations, all available on our website. So if you have any extra questions, check out volterapower.com. We'll continue putting out updates, newsletters, and additional content. But thank you all for joining.
Thanks for having me. See ya.
Thanks. Bye.